Welcome to Leading People with me, Gerry Murray. This is the podcast for leaders and HR decision makers who want to bring out the best in themselves and others. Every other week, I sit down with leading authors, researchers, and practitioners for deep dive conversations about the strategies, insights, and tools that drive personal and organizational success. And in between, I bring you one simple thing, short episodes that deliver practical insights and tips for immediate use. Whether you're here for useful tools or thought-provoking ideas, Leading People is your guide to better leadership. When things start to feel uncertain, I often notice something interesting. Most leaders don't step back, they step in. They try to bring more control, more certainty, more conviction. But what if the real risk and uncertainty isn't the situation, it's the parts of ourselves that we can't see? Research suggests we're far less self-aware than we believe. And in unstable or uncertain environments, those blind spots don't stay hidden. They shape our decisions, our relationships, and our leadership. In this episode of Leading People, I'm joined by Dr. Julia Carden to explore why we're not actually as self-aware as we think we are, and why that matters most when conditions feel uncertain. Julia is a leading researcher in the field, and we talk about identity, ego, defensiveness, feedback, and what really happens to leaders under pressure. In my own work, I often refer to adaptive capacity, our ability to stay open, steady, and flexible and effective during times of instability and uncertainty. My conversation with Julia explores one of the foundations of that capacity, self-awareness. So, if you've ever wondered why intelligent, capable leaders can still get in their own way, this one's for you. Julia Carden, welcome to Leading People.
Oh, thank you for having me here today, Gerry.
So, Julia, your name came up in a recent webinar, a neuroscience webinar, with Professor Patricia Ridgell and Ian McDermott, and somebody was sharing your references to your material, and Patricia said, "Oh yeah, Julia does great work," and so I checked you out, bought the book, and here we are today.
Thank you.
So to get us started, Julia, before we talk about your book, which came out in 2025, so it is a new book then, please share with me and my listeners the journey that led you to where you are today, and were there any epiphany moments along that journey?
Oh, gosh, big question to start with. I like to summarise it by using an advert that's used over here, which says born in Cornwall, made in the Royal Navy. So I was born and brought up in Cornwall, and my first job out of university was to become a Royal Naval officer. So I spent 10 years in the Royal Navy, and towards the end of that time, I specialised in working in the Admiralty Interview Board, which is an assessment centre for all naval and Royal Marine officers, and that got me into learning and development through that route. Through various other roles after that, I ended up setting up my own business in 2008. And I think you say epiphany moments. I like to think about crucible moments, those moments which perhaps change forever. The Navy definitely did that for me, but also setting up my own business. I'd always been in a secure, paid environment, getting a monthly paycheck, and all of a sudden running your own business, it certainly jiggled things up. And what got me to the book was through doing a PhD, which I know we're going to come on to.
Okay, and so the business you set up was, what was it focused on?
So focused on leadership development, and still doing at that time some assessment centre work, because I'd become known for that over the years and I had specialised in it. I transitioned out of the assessment centre work more into the development work, because you get to work with people over a longer period of time, and assessment centres you just see them for a little bit of time and you don't get to really connect with them.
Yeah, you probably see the development areas and you can't do much about it because they're just being evaluated either for taking into a company or for promotion or something within a company. Isn't that right? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
So the book is called, quite a provocative title in some ways, You Are Not as Self-Aware as You Think You Are. So, Julia, who is this book for and why now?
So the book's for leaders predominantly, but it could also be for people that are doing executive coaching, and it could be for anybody who's interested in self-awareness. Why now? I finished my PhD, which investigated and explored self-awareness a few years ago, and I didn't want it sitting on the shelf gathering dust. I also wanted to write a book that was very practically and very accessible for busy leaders, so they didn't have to get too tied up in the academia of it all. And so why now? And writing a book is a little bit of a narcissistic activity. Of course, it's very self-indulgent. I felt last year was the time to push myself and have a go at writing, and that's why now.
Very good. I think I can share that experience. I've been busy drafting myself recently, and I'm not sure, but I suppose it has a certain narcissistic, I suppose that you have to have some sense of it's going to be about you and something that you can tell the world. But at the same time, and every author I've spoken to privately about this say, it's one of those classic questions. You want to write a book? Are you sure you want to get into the work that goes into writing one of these things? So self-awareness, you break it down into two main components, which then each have their own subset of components. And before we explore your model, because you put a nice little model in the book which helps people, unifies the content, what are the reasons why people think they are more self-aware than they actually are? And I think you have a few examples, if I'm not mistaken, from the book itself, where people say, well, I'm really self-aware, and then you've kind of pointed out through some coaching or whatever that maybe they're not. So for anybody out there who's going, I'm self-aware, I don't need to listen to this, stay tuned. Right, Julia, what is it that what are some of the kind of common sort of errors that people make in terms of thinking about their self-awareness? If this conversation resonates and you're reflecting on your own leadership capacity, you might find our Team Leader Essentials and Performance Accelerator programs very helpful. Both are designed to help leaders strengthen the inner skills that drive outer performance, especially in uncertain and fast-moving environments. You'll find more details at widecircle.eu. That's widecircle.eu. Check out the link in the show notes.
Well, the title for the book actually came from a leader. I was working with his team members, actually, and it became really evident to me over a period of time that it wasn't the individuals in the team I should be coaching, but him. And when I was having a conversation with him, and I just sort of challenged him a little bit on who challenged him on his thinking, his reply to me was, I'm extremely self-aware, Julia, I don't need any coaching. And in that moment, of course, I knew he wasn't. And the reason I say I know he wasn't is because self-awareness is not a finite thing. It's not something you can develop and that's it. It's a dynamic, ever-evolving construct that ebbs and flows. So we're always evolving in terms of self-awareness. So that's the first reason I say we're not self-aware as we think we are, because this evolutionary dynamic construct. The second reason I say we're not as self-aware as we think we are is because most people don't even know what it is. I thought I knew what it was when I started my research. It was only when I started investigating that I found it had not been defined academically within the context of leadership development and adult development. And the third reason is you talk about the interpersonal components. How are we in relationship with others? Well, very rarely do we really know how other people are perceiving and receiving us. They might give us some feedback, but they will give us that feedback based on their map of the world and their filters. And so for us to really get a grip of that, and for us to even hear it and receive it in a way that we can process it, is really challenging. So that's why we're never as self-aware as we think we are. And the title is provocative and confrontative. And I know some people find it challenging. My invitation, though, is once you start exploring it, it can be a fulfilling journey. It can be a challenging journey as well.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing quite clearly here, and it comes up in many sort of things around anything to do with developing yourself, is all this development or even the self-awareness, it's a journey. It's never a destination. That's probably the most.
Correct.
Leadership is also a journey. It's not a destination. There are leadership moments along the way. There are performance moments along the way. Any leader who says, well, I've arrived, is probably arrived in the wrong place, maybe.
Yeah.
And I
100%.
And I've had those situations where I've been asked personally to do team building, teamwork, and the first person I want to talk to is the boss, and it'd be surprising how often their gatekeeper says, no, he's very busy, or something like that. And then you find out, you have that conversation. And I had even one guy once said to me, he said, well, you just do the teamwork and I'll watch. And I said, no, you won't. If I'm going to do the teamwork, you're in the team, you're going to take part. Because his whole idea was that they were broken and he was the only one who knew. And so we come across this a lot. And actually what I've noticed is, with some of those team leaders who tell you the story about the broken team, and then when they get actually in the session and they take part in some of the exercises, I've had a situation where they're the first to give feedback to the room, which sometimes is unusual because they don't tend to be the first people to talk about the experience. But I've had some leaders go, that was amazing. I just, that blew my mind because I didn't realize, I actually realized I don't know my people, and they're all sitting there. And that can be an aha moment of monumental proportions for somebody.
100%. And also, I just wonder how well those leaders know themselves to assume that the team is broken, but they're not. I mean, that's just fascinating.
Well, it's the tango analogy, isn't it? It's like who's standing on whose toes, basically. So why is self-awareness so important to leadership? We've kind of got into this aspect of it. Before we get into the components and the definition, why is it so important to leadership?
Well, who you are is how you lead. So if you don't know who you are and what your DNA is, and when I mean DNA, I'm not meaning so much the biological DNA, but all those bits that make up who you are, then you're not going to know how you're really leading. And also your unconscious reactions under stress or when you're triggered or hooked are going to come out. And I think about it like John Whittington, who writes a book about systems and constellation, uses a metaphor of a peacock. And, when we think about the peacock's tail and it's all fully displayed, that's all of the stuff of who we are, our values, our beliefs, our history, our needs, etc., etc. And we go into lead our teams with that peacock tail, and they come in with ours. So we need to understand what's in that peacock tail, because that's what everybody else is seeing, even if we're not aware of it. But more importantly, I think the more we get to know ourselves and understand that peacock tail, we can manage ourselves when we're under stress, when we're under pressure, and we can get comfortable in our own skin. And I talk about it enables us to get truly connected with ourselves. The more we get connected with ourselves, we can perhaps start to accept ourselves more, and our ego becomes less present. And that just means we can connect with others at a level of humanity. And then we can start to manage through uncertainty and volatility. And that's where all leaders are these days. That's what business is presenting. So for me, it's the route through to successful leadership in this very volatile, uncertain, fragile world that we're all working and living in. Yeah. But it takes the self-acceptance bit to get there.
Yeah, and going back to our mutual friend, Trisha Riddle, you're sort of alluding to the VUCA acronym that sort of gets used.
Yes, I am.
Our brains don't like it. They hate uncertainty. And so that's likely to have us behave in ways that we wouldn't really want to behave in, but other people experiencing us responding to the external, that environment factor, and that influencing how we relate to the people around us, and maybe we don't even notice it because we're so much fighting the situation that we're in that we're not maybe noticing how we're impacting other people.
Yeah, and if we get more self-aware, we'll start to get curious about, why am I reacting in that way? And what is it that's driving my need here? So in that, our brains don't like uncertainty, 100% they don't. But what is it we're defending in ourselves in that place of uncertainty? So that's where to go. And the more self-aware I am, the more in tune I get with that. And so I might not be able to stop it, but at least I'm aware of it, and I can start to be consciously thinking about the impact. Of course, we'll have bad days and good days. And that's why I say it's a very a construct that ebbs and flows. It's a state that ebbs and flows. We're not self-aware all the time.
Yeah. So let's explore the model a little bit so that we can, unpack some of the, because this came out of your research, right? So you're breaking self-awareness down into two main strata, basically. There's an interpersonal strata and an intrapersonal strata. And let's start with the interpersonal component. I'm curious why you discussed this first in your book, actually. Why did you not start with who am I before who am I to other people? So I'm just, that was one of the curiosities I had as I was reading the book. And it's up to you now, over to you to explain why the two strata, and you start with the interpersonal one, and the two elements in that you talk about are perception of others and behaviors, and maybe you can unpack what these mean, what you mean by these, and why they're important to how and how you can develop them.
So intrapersonal and interpersonal. Intrapersonal, known to self. Interpersonal, how others are seeing me. Which is the chicken and which is the egg? They could be the either way around, and the intrapersonal definitely informs the interpersonal and how we show up. The reason I put interpersonal first was because self-awareness, as I'm talking about, is about us as leaders. So we're doing that in relation to other people. And so that's why I put the interpersonal first, because I'm doing it with the purpose of, how am I showing up as a leader? How am I showing up in the world? So that's why I put that first. But it is that chicken and egg question, which should come first. So you could argue it both ways.
Actually, your story you told about the leader actually seems to hint at, the starting point being when he said, I'm super self-aware. You'd probably heard, even in interacting with the team, that he might not be as self-aware as some of the stuff they might perceive. Yeah.
And also, actually, it just prompted my reflection here. When I was doing my Viva, one of the questions one of the examiners asked me was about psychopaths and narcissists, who were they self-aware or weren't they self-aware? And we debated that in my Viva for some time, and I had to go back and do an amend around that. So I believe, and I haven't done research in this area around psychopaths and narcissists, so I'm saying this with some caution, they are very aware from an intrapersonal perspective, but they're less concerned. I think they're aware of their interpersonal self-awareness, but they're less concerned with it. So that's another reason for putting it first, that we're doing this with a positive intent there.
Okay.
So
let's talk about these two elements then of perception, the perception of other people and behaviors. So let's unpack that a little bit, and why they're so important, and how any leader out there, or any of us for that matter, even a team player, can develop these.
Yeah. So perception of others, how are others experiencing and receiving us? How do they feel in our presence? How motivated do they feel when they're with us? Now, getting a grasp and understanding of this is challenging, as I alluded to earlier. But as leaders, we could ask our people, I say there's two questions, and you've got to ask both, and I highlight in this book, is, what do I do as your leader or as your team colleague that you value, that supports you, that you you appreciate, something like that. It could be one of those adjectives. You could put another one there. And the second question which you must ask is, what do I do as a leader that irritates you, gets in the way, demotivates you, undermines you, or what do I do that you don't appreciate? And just, or how do you feel when I'm around? That could be another simple question. But there, we have to be quite brave to ask those questions, because we might hear something we don't want to hear. And that's the other way. The other way of that perception of others that I feel is a little bit, it can be fun. It can also be very painful. It's when we're with people in our team or colleagues and they're really irritating us and we don't like them. What is it that they're doing that we don't like? Or what is it they're doing that irritates us? And they're probably, or if not almost certainly, holding a mirror up to stuff we don't like in ourselves, the shadow side of us that we're not so prepared to think about. And that's another way of getting some thinking about perception of others as well.
A little bit of Carl Jung creeping in there. Yeah.
100% Carl Jung. Yeah. And this is key because, as a leader, I've got to motivate my team. I've got to understand, am I having the impact that I'm wanting to have? Or how can we work together to create the impact we want to have? And then the behaviours, which it'd be easier to get a grasp over if we videoed ourselves doing a team meeting, if we videoed ourselves doing a keynote address or whatever we're doing with our team, if we're prepared to watch it back and watch our behaviours. And I just don't mean our body language. I mean our tone of voice, our pace, what words are we putting emphasis on, and just watching how the other person is receiving that can be hugely revealing. As a coach, I've had to do that to get accreditation, but, I never had to do it as a leader, so it would be interesting. I think it could be really revealing. It's so painful to watch yourself back. I hate it, but it really gives you that sense of what are my behaviours doing?
Strange. You reminded me of a conference I attended way back in 2009, I think. It was on professional communications. This might shock you or horrify you, but there was a professor of communications there who had worked with multinationals and basically said that the secret to getting change through in an organization was to get the executives to be scripted and just follow the script. And even better, and in those days, remember, video wasn't as prevalent as it is today. Get them in front of a video camera, he said, and that's all you need to do. And get them to read the script, and then they'll kind of hold themselves accountable to the script they've just read. And my own experience and my own studies in psychology would suggest that is absolute bullshit in many ways, because when you were talking there, I was thinking, one of the interesting challenges here is that a leader might get feedback from two people and extrapolate that out and generalize it to be the only way they're being perceived. And there must be an element of this around individual perceptions. You mentioned the map earlier, and we know about Korzybski's map is not the territory, and everybody's working from their own best map that's available to them. So in many ways, feedback from an individual is their experience of you. It isn't necessarily the experience of the other 9 people on the team. Isn't that right? Maybe you could talk to some of those things that I've just reflected on there. You're listening to Leading People with me, Gerry Murray. My guest this week is Dr. Julia Carden. Coming up, why other people's perceptions of us can lag behind our own development, what makes feedback useful rather than threatening, and why self-acceptance is a quiet but powerful leadership strength.
Yeah, and don't forget, if I'm a team member, I'm receiving the team leader depending on how I'm showing up that day myself. So, if I'm low in resilience or I'm a bit ill, I'm going to have a very different experience if somebody who's feeling on top of their game and firing on all cylinders. And if you come back to me as a leader next week, when I'm now feeling on top of my game, I'm going to might experience you in a different way. I also been reflecting a lot lately that some people perception of one is shaped by the first time they interacted with you. And you may have developed yourself, you may have done lots of self-work, but they still will be judging you against that initial perception. And that is also, so you think, oh, I'm now showing up in this way because I've done all this self-work, I've done all this development, but they're still seeing you as they used to. There's always going to be a mismatch. Hence, you're never going to be as self-aware as you think you are, because others are going to perceive you very differently. And also they're going to perceive us differently depending on the environments we're in.
That would suggest to me a question around, is it useful for leaders to actually explain to their people that they're going through development, and how easy or challenging is that for a leader to let's say admit, or to say, I'm actually going through development at the moment, and I want you to help me pace myself through this development process and feedback to me. Am I actually improving or am I not, so that I can better calibrate how I'm showing up?
I think it's great if leaders can do that and show that they're not perfect individuals, because that's the reality. They're not. And, that feeds into all of Brené Brown's work around vulnerability and the power of vulnerability. So, yes, as long as the leaders are clear on their boundaries for receiving the feedback, and they absolutely mean it, because I think some leaders come off a program and say to their team, oh, I've just been on this program, I'm developing my self-awareness, I want you to be really open with me, and they don't actually want you to be open with them at all. So I think be careful for what you ask for, and be clear on what you're asking for from your team, so they're clear on what you want, the sort of feedback that will support you.
Yeah. I've seen some research on feedback from a neuroscience point of view, which suggests that we really don't like unsolicited feedback from others, because the first thing that comes up is, depending on what our hippocampus and amygdala remembers from the last time we got tough feedback or whatever, there's a certain program reaction that will kick in. However, the conclusion of that particular situation, or that particular, I think it was on a webinar I came across this, was that actually the most useful thing, if you want to introduce feedback in an organization, is to get people to ask for feedback in a way that, they have to learn how to receive it. And if people ask for it from the people that they really want to have it from, but understand that it's just that person's opinion maybe, or that person's experience of you in a given moment, that can make feedback work better than this idea. You have to, you just have to take the feedback. That's tough. If people give you tough feedback, that's your issue. Or people feeling that a feedback culture means that everybody can give feedback to everybody, whether the other person wants it or not. I mean, what's your experience of?
Yeah, I agree with you. Unsolicited feedback is unhelpful. I also find it unhelpful when leaders say, how do you think I'm doing? How am I as your leader? It's too general. Be much more specific with the question. And I'm also saying, when you get the feedback, just say, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm going to go away and think about it. Write it down in the rawest form, and just let it settle, and maybe process it with a coach or a therapist afterwards, or a good quality thinking partner that's not who you can just think through. And I would say that feedback that rattles your cage and leaves you a bit discombobulated is probably worth really processing and thinking about it. And it's like the news, isn't it? We're bombarded with information 24/7. It's a piece of data. We can choose to ignore it if we want to, like we can choose to ignore a headline on the news. I just think it's probably worth just have a wondering as to why did that person deliver that feedback. It could be a self-projection of that own person that they're projecting onto you. So it's just worth thinking about, reflecting.
There is this concept called feed forward, which requires the person giving feedback to actually give you something specific that you could try out instead of. So it forces them to be, rather than saying, you irritate me as a leader, which is where do you go from that, to say, when you do this, it does tend to upset me a little bit. What you could maybe try out is do this other specific thing instead before you, whatever it is you do, maybe you could do this as well. At least people can test that out. But, I've been amazed in all the trainings I've done where we encourage people to give feedback, particularly things like presenting training and that, how generalized and, unuseful the feedback is. It's just like, you could do something better with your voice. I mean, where do you start
100%.
With that? When sometimes what they mean is you speak too quickly or something like that. Yeah. But anyway, let's get into the intrapersonal aspect of the model now, because there's quite a lot in here. And some of it we've started reflecting anyway around this whole notion of, well, I'll let you unpack it. So we start with the beliefs and values perhaps, and how important those are, because they're usually a key part of our identity, our sense of self in the first place. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you discovered.
Yeah, I think so. The reason I did this model very much as a visual is because it is such a complex construct that's multi-layered. I wanted people to be able to get a handle on what it might be and have access points. So out of those components or ingredients, as I call them, you could access any of them and start pulling that apart, which will probably reveal something about the others. I like to think about those components, including beliefs and values, as a messy ball of wool. And if I start unpicking the beliefs and values component, I'll probably get some understanding of what my motivations are, about where my feelings are stemming from, or some other such thing. Beliefs and values are at the top there. I'm a qualitative researcher, not a quantitative. The reason that the top is when I said to my participants in my research, what do you think comprises self-awareness? Beliefs and values came out easier and came up the most frequently. I also think it does tend to drive a lot of the other things and link together. But again, which came first? So beliefs for me aren't just religious beliefs. They're also beliefs we have about how we should show up in the world, about who we are in the world. So we could have a belief like it's always important to me that I'm the best in the group, that I get the best results in the group. It's always important to me that I am on time. I'm not good enough. I've got to keep proving myself. I've got to keep getting more of a... They're all the beliefs we could hold. So they could be positive and they could be less than positive, but they could drive positive behaviour. So beliefs and then values. And it always amazes me how many people, when I say to them, so, what are your values? Some of the senior leaders, they'll come up with some things like honesty, integrity. But I'll say, what else? And so few of them have really thought about it, down to maybe status, choice, autonomy, getting really granular on those, because they do drive our behaviors, they drive our choices, and also they can become things that we want to protect unconsciously when we're under stress. So that's why I started with the beliefs and values component. Just some of the others there. Go on. Sorry, Gerry.
No, it's okay. I was just going to let you continue with the next ones the other four.
Yeah. So the other ones there are strengths and weaknesses. Could be part of personality traits. So I like to think about with every strength, it could become overdone, which some people label a weakness. So I'm a very caring person. I could end up smothering other people. So it's with what frequency, with what duration, and in what context am I delivering those personality traits, those strengths and weak strengths, which then can be perceived as a weakness. When I talk about motivations, what is it that motivates us, but also what are our needs? So we all have our fundamental needs of being loved. We all have a fundamental need of belonging. And we also have some needs around control. To what extent do we have them? But what other needs might we have? So, looking back when I talked about assessment centres, I have a real need to connect deeply with other individuals. Assessment centres didn't allow me to do that because they were in and out, whereas working with somebody over a period of time does. So that's why I ended up dropping that. Internal mental states both our feelings and our emotions, alongside that internal thought process. That could also be our internal voice that some of us have going in our heads all the time. And then really importantly, which I just feel we've become really disconnected with as we've got more online working, is what's going on in our bodies. How is our body responding to the situation? What's going on beneath our head? And one of my mentors and coaching supervisors, Eunice Aquilina, talks about how we carry our history in our body, how the shape with what we show up with, are we sort of shrinking away, or are we, here I am, look at me, all of that can be shaped by our history. So getting more aware of how we're carrying ourselves. Where's the tension in our body? Where are we softer? Where or not, as the case may be? And that's been a real place that I've, as a result of my research, I've been really diving into.
Yeah, and that brings you into the area of interoception, and that's sort of an emerging, it's a nice technical term for paying attention to what's going on within you at any moment in time. But I think paying attention is part of it. It's being able to interpret it and understand it. And this always comes back to the whole concept of state, because we move in and out of states all the time as human beings, and no state is good or bad within itself. As Shakespeare said, nothing is good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. But it's understanding which states are when we're at our most resourceful and at our best, or most able to perform what we're trying to perform. And I personally find that is what links all this together a little bit. Is like, it's okay saying, well, I have butterflies in my stomach. What's the message? And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's useful to have them at this moment in time.
And also, why have those butterflies come up today? What is it that's important to me about this interaction I'm going to go to? What's at stake for me here? Which probably taps into a need or a motivation. It could also tap into some beliefs and values. So, this is where they start to all interlink together.
Yeah. So there's a huge amount, each of these elements, and there's I think 7 of them in total. Each of these components has their own chapter with lots of little examples from your coaching experience, etc., and then lots of little summary boxes to suggest to people how they could go about addressing these. The final section of your book is entitled Self-Connection, the Route to Leading Through Uncertainty. Now, we mentioned that uncertainty bit a little bit earlier, but what do you mean by self-connection, and how does this help us become better leaders?
Self-connection, really getting to know ourselves, and then accepting ourselves, accepting all of who I am, the stuff I don't like, the stuff I don't like, all of that, and accepting that that's just a part of who we are. We've all got, you said young earlier on, we've all got the shadow side, the stuff we're less comfortable with, but accepting it. And that's important for me, because when self-awareness was first written about academically in the late 60s, it was deemed to be an aversive state. So a state that created depression, anxiety, rumination. And why I feel it's better linked from a self-acceptance and self-connection perspective is we're doing it from a place of reflection and rather than rumination. So if we get caught into that ruminatory, anxious state, then we're actually in a vicious circle and we're not accepting ourselves. So that's what I mean by self-connection, really getting to know ourselves and accepting who we are as a person. Because as you've just said, using Shakespeare's quote, we're all good people, at heart. We're all, human beings who deserve love and deserve to be on this world. Why does that mean we're better as leaders? Well, Yetunde Hoffman, in her brilliant book Beyond Engagement, talks about love-based organisations, and she defines love within an organisation as acceptance of all of who I am, and therefore acceptance of all of who you are. So we can't really accept our team unless we can first accept ourselves. So we're going to have dysfunction if we don't get to that place. And also, as I alluded to earlier on, when I can stop my ego taking over, so I've got to be right, I've got to have all the answers as a leader, when I can let that drop away through self-acceptance and know I'm as vulnerable as the next person in the team, then actually I can say to my team, what other ideas have we got? Let's just hold this space for a moment and just think about what else could emerge. And then I think there'll be more possibilities. There'll be more, okay, we haven't got all the answers. What's the best we can do now? And we're more likely to approach it in a healthy way from I've got to win this. I've got to, we're going to fail if we don't. And it just becomes much more of a conducive environment to getting good thinking and good decisions.
Okay, so is there anything I should have asked you about this book that I have so far forgotten or omitted to ask you about it?
Is there anything you should have asked me? Gosh. I can't think of anything off the top of my head really right now.
Okay. So I think for my listeners, that means that the rest is in the book and you have to acquire a copy of the book to dig deeper into.
Please do.
So coming to the end, Julia, of our conversation, if my listeners could take away just one idea from you are not as self-aware as you think you are and experiment with it over the next few weeks or days even, what would you hope that experiment might be? What might be some starting points for people?
Yeah, I would encourage somebody to pose a question for themselves and write that down and just now and again come back to it over the course of the week or month, whatever they set as their period of reflection, and just see what emerges and let that happen. So if they can't think of a question, I always start to say the best one to start with is, why did I behave in the way I did today in that meeting? Or why am I behaving in that way this week? And just allow that to float around your unconscious and see what emerges.
Okay, that's probably pretty it sounds like a simple question. I'm pretty sure that when people ask it and maybe even journal it or whatever, they'll start to find that it leads to very interesting places. Good. Okay, so how can people contact you? Because I'll put some links in the show notes, but how can people contact you? And I believe for at least one lucky listener, you are prepared to offer them something.
Yeah, so if they're in the UK, I'll send them a book. If they're not in the UK, I can send them a PDF of the book. So for the first person that contacts me on LinkedIn, you're going to put a notice on LinkedIn. So to please connect with me on LinkedIn, or they can find me on my website, carden-consulting.co.uk. Okay,
so Julia Carden, thanks for sharing your insights, tips and wisdom with me and my listeners here today.
Oh, Gerry, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Coming up next on Leading People.
We have this thing called our brain, and our brain is primary function is to keep us safe. It's not to make us smart or funny. That may come later, but it's always going, will this hurt me? Will this hurt me? And it doesn't like to feel uncomfortable. So when we try to sort things out on our own, if it's a surface level and no emotions are attached, fine. And AI can help us with that. But if there's something else getting in the way, that we have to go deeper into our belief systems and even how we define ourselves, the brain says, no, not going to let you do that. And the metaphor I use is, have you ever tried to tickle yourself?
If you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Julia Carden about self-awareness and how leaders can't see all of themselves under pressure, then this next conversation goes one step further. Because even when we want to see more clearly, our brains resist it. Leading executive coach and author, Dr. Marcia Reynolds, explains why sustainable growth rarely happens through advice, instruction, or telling people what to do. Instead, it happens when someone creates the kind of presence that allows us to examine our thinking safely. And that someone is often a skilled coach. In this next episode, we explore why coaching isn't about fixing problems, it's about helping people see differently. Why emotional regulation sits at the heart of leadership, and why, in an age of AI, human presence may become even more valuable. If Julia's episode explored self-awareness as capacity in uncertainty, this conversation explores the relational side of that capacity. You won't want to miss it.